This president is determined, and I think it is demonstrated in his language. He says that we're at war with al-Qaeda. We're going to destroy al-Qaeda, the organization, and we're going to demonstrate through our actions, whether it be in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and other places, that al-Qaeda might be able to run, but they're not going to be able to hide.
The instability in Yemen is a threat to regional stability and even global stability. And we're working with Qatar and others to think of the best way forward to try to deal with the security concerns.
The focus is Yemen. Today, the government of Yemen launched new attacks against a stronghold, al-Qaeda stronghold just outside the capital city. This is the president met again with his counterterrorism advisor in the Oval Office, talking about the situation there. The U.S. Embassy remained closed for the second day, as did the British Embassy, and Japan, Germany, and France also sensing some peril there in the capital city of Sana'a, closing their embassies as well. What about this situation? Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of The Hill, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Happy New Year to all of you. Charles, the situation in Yemen, where we go from here?
Look, there are two issues in Yemen. The first is, how do you fight al-Qaeda there? And nobody is sanguine about opening a third front in the war on terror. We had General Petraeus over in the capital today. The idea is to strengthen the weak central government and to increase our participation in the airstrikes, for example. But the second issue is this. Why, apart from weakening al-Qaeda directly, are we going to stop gratuitously and insanely strengthening al-Qaeda with the release of Yemenis who are being held in our custody? We already know that some of those who were released in the Bush years are the leaders of al-Qaeda in Yemen today. There were 6 Yemenis released last month. And now we've apparently negotiated an agreement with the government that it will hold on to these. Well, I'm not so sure it's going to work. We already know that all the attackers on the USS Cole, all of them who were held in Yemen, are now free, either released or broke out of jail. So that's a rather weak straw that you want to lean on. And the issue is this: with the 91 Yemenis remaining in Guantanamo, there's no way, and these are the worst of the worst because a lot of them already are released. Why do we have a president who keeps maintaining again and again that his priority number one in the war on terror is the closing of Guantanamo? I just want to ask one question, because what we heard on Sunday, all from spokesman after spokesman, is it's a rallying cry, it's a tool of terrorism. Imagine if Guantanamo disappeared overnight in a tsunami today. Would that make any difference whatsoever on recruiting for al-Qaeda in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, or Afghanistan? It would make none. The list of grievances, excuses, or causes of al-Qaeda is endless. Closing Guantanamo will do only one thing. It will strengthen al-Qaeda because it will help the recruiting in the sense of sending them already hardened terrorists who will take up the fight again.
A.B., John Brennan, among others, on the Sunday talk shows, defending the administration's point of view, saying that a lot of these Yemenis were released under the Bush administration. We hear the Bush administration mentioned many times. He did it again this weekend.
Well, sending John Brennan out to the Sunday shows to offer this sort of bold and firm and resolute response that initially did not come from President Obama a week ago was a clear signal that they recognize that former Vice President Dick Cheney and other Republicans are driving and controlling this entire narrative about President Obama's terror policies. As for Yemen, Americans are learning just now that this administration has been working for some time to try to coordinate with the Yemeni government to share intelligence, and of course that they coordinated on those airstrikes on December 17th and 24th on al-Qaeda leaders there. However, as they hear about it now, after the fact, after an attack was foiled by a passenger and some bad luck in the underwear of the would-be Christmas Day bomber, they're also learning about, as Charles points out, how dangerous the detainees who have left Guantanamo Bay in the Bush administration have become, directing this very Christmas Day attack after attending an art therapy rehabilitation program in Saudi Arabia. One of them became Abdul Muttalib's trainer. So I think that there is literally bipartisan panic in the Congress right now about sending any more detainees back to Yemen, and it'll be very hard for the administration to defend that policy.
Steve?
Well, look, what I want to know is, what was John Brennan's point in raising the Bush administration? You know, you've had some of us, myself included, who have been critical of the Bush administration's release of these folks, but what is John Brennan's point? his point is purely political. If he were actually going to correct the mistake and stop releasing people from Guantanamo Bay, he could claim that he's making a policy argument, a substantive argument. There is no other point for him to make other than a political one, and to say, I'm blaming my predecessor for this release, if he's not going to actually fix the mistake. What you've seen from the administration over the past week is a complete revisionist history on Yemen. The first article that I wrote at the Weekly Standard under Barack Obama was a long piece about Yemen. The administration policy at the time was that a majority of the Yemenis kept in Guantanamo Bay were not only to be repatriated to Yemen, but repatriated and released. At the time, there were about 100 of them, so you're talking about more than 50 people there. 75% of the Yemenis at Gitmo have been through an al-Qaeda training camp. 75% of the Yemenis at Gitmo have stayed in an al-Qaeda guest house, something that AB couldn't do if she just happened to be come in contact with al-Qaeda. This was a flawed policy from the beginning. This was nowhere in the president's rhetoric for a year. He spent far more time. He didn't
give any speeches about Yemen, didn't mention Yemen.
He mentioned them occasionally, but he said, you know, the centerpiece of his counterterrorism policy, as Charles says, was to close Guantanamo Bay. This is revisionist history on Yemen, and I hope the mainstream media doesn't let him get away with it. There's a lot there.
What about, Charles, let me ask you about the possibility of U.S. military action in Yemen. What do you think about that?
It's not a place where you want to go and invade. It's like Afghanistan. It's a wild place. It's like the Northwest Territories of Pakistan. It's never had a strong central government. It's got secessionists in the south, Houthis in the north who are Iranian clients. It's so complicated, it's almost incomprehensible. All we can do is have our weaponry in place, like the predators, gather intelligence, give intelligence, and work with the unreliable central government. It's not a place where you want to start a war. But remember, the Saudis and Jordanians are also in that area, and they're on our side. I'd rather have the locals involved in the war than a direct involvement of the United States.
And A.B., quickly, General Petraeus was there this weekend and met with officials there saying that the U.S. would double, more than double, the counterterrorism funding of $67 million. There's some questions about what they've done with the previous money and what additional money would do, plus Congress has to approve all that.
Right, that's true. I have a feeling with this, the news of this threat, which is news to many Americans, that Congress will approve it, but there is always a question about whether or not the Yemeni government, which is weak, can be trusted to use this money for counterterrorism and not to pay off tribes and other people they depend on for political power.
We're going to continue this discussion. Should the man who authorities say tried to blow up that airline in Detroit, over Detroit, be tried as a criminal or an enemy combatant?